Many of us looking for more joy can easily find it with our pets. They provide companionship and unconditional love, and we lavish them with love and attention in return. But there are millions of homeless dogs and cats who desperately need help as they risk losing their lives when animal shelters run out of space. Best Friends Animal Society is spearheading an effort right now to make this year the one in which all adoptable animals are saved. Today, we'll talk about how you can help. That's all up next on Still Time for Joy, where we share practical advice for weathering life's storms and inspiring stories of resilience. Hello, I'm Sandra Levine, host of Still Time for Joy. My guest today is Marc Peralta, Chief Program Officer of Best Friends Animal Society, who is working with animal shelters and rescue groups around the country towards making the whole country no-kill in 2025. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you.
And I'm excited to talk to you too. This topic is very near and dear to my heart. I produced a program on animal welfare and adoption for about 15 years. And in the early 1990s, very naively, I did my first story about an animal shelter, and I had no idea that healthy adoptable dogs and cats were being euthanized at shelters simply because they ran out of space. And at that time, we were talking about many millions of animals every year. So beyond the obvious loss of an innocent animal's life, what is it like for animal shelter workers who have to euthanize healthy and adoptable pets?
I mean, one word for it is it's traumatic. And a lot of what drives me, of course, is the ability to save healthy, treatable animals. But I often think about colleagues. I started as a animal care worker myself in a shelter and naively had no idea either. And I took a job having no idea. So I think about colleagues. I think about new generations of people entering animal shelters. And that trauma, you see compartmentalization, you see a lot of mental health issues that proceed with people who simply want to take a job to help animals at low pay almost always, but certainly there's quite a price to pay when you're an animal shelter worker.
Yeah, certainly. I had interviewed people back in the day and shelter workers who were in the position of euthanizing even dozens of animals every single day who were
hmm
clearly traumatized from their work. So I'm happy to say things have improved. And before we talk about best friends and your background, I want you right off the bat, please, to tell me at least one or two things that an individual or somebody working in the animal welfare field can do to help animals right now.
Well, if you're an individual and an advocate or an animal lover, I think the best thing that you can do is really be a proponent for utilizing shelters and rescues. Shelters and rescues spay and neuter all of their animals. There's a lot of medical care that gets taken care of, and we need more adopters, and just a few more to kind of tip the scale for us and the needless killing of animals in shelters. And if you're working in a shelter, I think that one thing that I would say to you, or you're a volunteer at a shelter, is finding ways to continue to trust the public a little bit more. It's we see the most terrible things at times, and it skews our perception of who animal lovers are in our communities. But by and large, animal lovers are great people, and they are the ones that will solve every problem for us. So finding ways to continue to keep that hope and inspiration alive, and trusting your public to help you is that's what I would say for you.
So, what you're saying is sometimes in animal shelters, they're so concerned about doing what's in the pet's best interest that they might present you with a 20-page questionnaire, and if you've missed one vet appointment or something, they won't consider you as an adopter, right?
Yeah, or if you don't have a fence, or if you live in a certain area, we call it loving them to death, and it quite frankly can be loving them to death. People figure things out. We just have to find ways to, of course, make sure that somebody's going to take care of this animal and that animal's going to be safe. But where how tall their fences are and some of those kind of things don't really mean things when everything's said and done.
So, you have a very deep love for animals. And you mentioned earlier you started working at an animal shelter, and now you're the chief program officer at Best Friends. For people who aren't familiar with Best Friends, I know it started as a sanctuary in Utah in 1984 and has since grown to be a national organization. Tell me a little bit about Best Friends when it started and Best Friends today.
Best friends were a group of idyllic souls that were trying to find a way to build a sanctuary for a certain subset of animals that frankly exploded pretty quickly. So 1984, very naive, like many of us getting into the field, wanting to help animals, and then understanding that there was this massive issue with animals not getting out of shelters simply for space. So fast forward now, we have nearly 900 individuals working all over the country with over 4,000 different rescues and shelters and organizations really striving to work side by side them by implementing programming to really help make sure that animals get out alive. And they truly are, shelters truly are those safety nets that they're intended to be, which even includes things like emergency response. So the LA fires that took place in January, we were out there for um, quite some time and still working in recovery. But even this little girl, Cordelia, was one of the 1,700 animals that we helped clear out of LA shelters to make room for lost and displaced animals from the fire. And now Cordelia is Cordelia Peralta, and a part of her new home with me, and traveling around and working and helping other animals in shelters just like her dad.
Oh. Now, getting back to the movement we've been talking about, in 2016, Best Friends announced that it was going to work towards making the country completely no kill in 2025. In shelters, sometimes animals have medical conditions or very, very serious behavior issues. Not every single animal can be saved. 100% of animals are not adoptable. So, how does Best Friends define no kill, and how have things improved since 2016?
So what we came up with, along with many others, is a 90% save rate. So a save rate, just like anything, is a percentage of what are the amount of animals that are getting out alive, and that's 9 out of 10 animals that enter shelters. So it's really successful. And if you say, why is it not 10 out of 10? Well, shelters get animals that are sick and suffering and are not going to recover, and euthanasia is the true thing. That is not something that no kill is against. It does not mean every animal gets out, and you certainly do have dangerous animals, and we don't want dangerous animals being released. So that 10% allots for those type of animals that come in. And I'm happy to say, as we've gone along since 2016, you're talking about 65% of the country, rural shelters, big municipals like New York City, that are all hitting that benchmark of no kill. So it's kind of showing that it is absolutely possible and a good measurement. So 90% save rate is how we measure that philosophy in across the different shelters across the country.
So now in 2025, Best Friends is holding educational summits all over the country to help spread the message about how to reach this goal. What are some of the programs that you help shelters to take on in order to improve their statistics and in order to improve the plight of animals? And what kind of messages are being told to the animal welfare community at the summits?
No kill is hope. No kill is inspiration. So the reason that we said in 2016 that we wanted to reach no kill by 2025 was to challenge ourselves to say we know that no kill is inevitable. It's happening in the country. But if it doesn't happen until 2035, that's 10 years of whiskers, that those numbers represent that potentially could have been saved. So we really want to amplify ourselves to challenge that. So in the summit, some of it is just bringing that. A lot of what can be solved in animal welfare is just people simply believing they can do things that they've been told maybe for decades that they can't. Certainly shelter workers, and that was my experience coming in to begin with. But I think programming wise, you have landmark programming that spay and neuter, the landmark programming, those are things that are, just kind of foundational to animal welfare, but they're things now like community cat work because there are levels of cats that aren't used to living in houses, and we for over a century brought them into shelters in large numbers and exterminated them through taxpayer dollars, but they're still there. So it's been inhumane and it's been ineffective. So there's alternatives that are humane that kind of help control that. So we'll talk about that and even legislative laws to make sure that if you allow a cat to live in its outside community where it's lived its whole life, it's not abandonment. Continuing to push for adoption programs, and again, it goes back to that trusting the public and doing better ways of relocating lost animals. But I will say a lot of it is around just inspiration, connection, and networking because the bigger your social support networks are, be it a shelter or if you're an advocate, the more that you're able to accomplish. And we know that we also set in social environments is a lot more fun to do kind of transformative work like you would be doing in animal welfare. So it's just a great way of getting connected with people and learning things like community cat work, what we call barrier-free adoptions, and other no-kill programming such as that.
For people who aren't familiar with some of the changes that have taken place with the attitudes towards spaying and neutering and the types of spay neuter programs that are available, what would you say has been the impact of more spaying and neutering? I mean, that's really key.
Spaying and neutering, I think, was the first transitional change starting in the late 60s and early 70s to really starting to see the animal population reduce. And now it is normal for shelters and rescues. Just simply, that's the thing that's amazing to have actual shelter medicine programs. Colleges now teach shelter medicine, but if you spoke to somebody who went to vet school, maybe even in the early 2000s, shelter medicine was not something that was a known factor or even a piece of getting a veterinary degree. So that's changed. You're seeing shelters take a more forward role right now in providing spay neuter. Many also even provide spay neuter for the public. I know when I was at the Pennsylvania SPCA in Philadelphia, I mean, we did 30,000 spay and neuters, which 20,000 of those tended to be for public people in North Philly and Northeast Philadelphia. So you're seeing things like that more. But there is always a fight and a battle for us to continue to make sure that there's enough resource for spay and neuter out there, which is a constant challenge and barrier for us just in general for pet owners.
And I also read that Best Friends has worked very hard to connect shelters more deeply with the community, and that having a good foster network, for instance, just increases the ability of a shelter to save more animals. When you go to a shelter, what is your first approach with figuring out how to help them?
So I meet the people, I see what's going on, I ask a lot of questions, and I do a lot of listening. So there's not a lot of directives, there's not a lot of why don't you do this kind of going on right now. You see things that are recognizable in every shelter, but every community can be a little bit different. The situation, the amount of staff that are there, or their local ordinances can be different. So a lot of it is just kind of getting a quick lay of the land from the people that do the work every day.
You mentioned reducing barriers to adoption. What have been some of the most ridiculous barriers that you've seen, and what do you suggest to shelters to do to be a little bit more accommodating to reality?
When I started in animal welfare, there was a special application process if you wanted to adopt a pit bull, for instance. So anything and deemed a pit bull, and that was based on site, which is not a great factor for, suggesting dog breeds. Certainly, it can work sometimes, but it's not great. So it was a much more rigorous process, which meant that the animal that was already the most at risk of getting out of that shelter alive was even getting the population of adopters reduced even more, because simply going through something that's maybe as comprehensive as trying to buy a house, to get a certain kind of dog is a significant barrier for a pet owner, certainly when they can go walk and buy one from a pet store. I think the other thing is there was a lot of well-intentioned. The month of October, we weren't allowed to adopt black cats. Again, black cats already have a lot of things working against them, for whatever reason. Because Halloween was there and there was a lot of stories of cats being abused, we can't adopt black cats. So there's a lot of those kind of things, which of course are well intentioned, but what they actually do is put these animals more at risk of getting out alive. Because I think the thing that's not overly intuitive is the environment of a shelter. It doesn't matter how great the staff are, doesn't matter how great the kennels are cleaned. It is one of the most stressful environments for an animal. So therefore, the longer that they're there, they can deteriorate to the point where they do become dangerous. Think about being locked in a closet yourself and what that could do to your mental well-being. These are social creatures as well. So I think those are the kind of things that we try to help people keep the bigger picture in mind. And again, you're going to hear it a lot from me, but it goes back to trusting the public, not making rules on the exceptions, but more on the bigger kind of possibilities. But of course, we love these little furry things and we feel responsible for them. So that's where we can fall back into some of these barriers.
Sure. I grew up, my father was a veterinarian, my brother is a veterinarian. We are true animal lovers. And whenever I adopted from a shelter, I was worried, am I going to cross the T the wrong way and be,
Right.
told I'm not a candidate? But luckily, I have adopted many animals from shelters and they've all been absolutely wonderful. So I want to get back to the summits, please. You mentioned earlier that they're inspirational. They're about rallying the troops. They're about getting people psyched up.
The issue that you have is we're so close. And as you get closer to a goal, things get harder. We're also getting to the point where we're really struggling with maybe some dug in areas or communities that really just don't believe in community cat programs and they're still wanting to kill them, or they're still doing pit bull bans. So it's the work is always hard. But I do believe it's actually a symbol of hope because it's close. We're close to a tipping point, and that's always the hardest stuff. But boy, that dawn is just kind of right over the hill.
As I mentioned, when I first started covering animal welfare stories, I know the statistics weren't very accurate because nobody even knew how many shelters there were in the country. Shelters weren't required to report, etc. But the statistic consistently were estimated to be like 17 million
Million.
pets, million
Hmm.
pets a year being euthanized, sometimes 13, 14, but those were consistent estimates, 13 to 17 million pets. And in 2016, when Best Friends started with this decision, the statistics were showing about 2 million pets. So, for people who feel like things are so terrible, they've actually come so far. And now it's down to what?
Just over 400,000, yeah, which is an incredible amount of progress, but still too many. When we talk about 17 million or 400,000, we're really talking about animals that should have had a second chance at a home.
So, how confident are you that you're going to reach the goal?
I'm very confident in our 2025 goal. Even if we have a couple of different lingerers, like we are, it's an inevitability at this point. We're just really trying to speed up the clock because the thing that I'll say again that you brought up earlier is these are also affecting people's lives. So
Of
these are
course.
people that could be fired for, I don't know, using their phone to take a picture and put an animal on social media, yet their organization, their city, their municipality, their board, whatever their structure is okay with them killing kittens and puppies. And
Yeah.
that just is not something that should be a normalized factor for people taking a job to help animals. And it doesn't need to happen anymore. There might have been a time 100 years ago where that was just what it was going to be, but we're the richest country in the world and we have the capabilities. We just need to believe we can do it and band together and do it. And again, bring that inspiration back because that's how we've gotten this far.
I've always thought that if everyone would spend a day in an animal shelter,
Yeah.
they would do the right thing by animals in general. If people saw what the workers in animal shelters have to deal with day in and day out. So, let me just ask you quickly about your background and how you got started in this field and your feeling and connection to animals.
So I am a son of an Army sergeant major and divorced parent. So I went to 13 schools from K to 12. So I'm not one of those individuals that ever had lifelong friends, except for a dog and a cat. So those were really my stability in regards to relationships beyond my immediate family growing up. Now, I will say I got into the field very naively. I was a music promoter. I owned a bar venue in Colorado, and I was doing that by the time I was, in my early 20s. It was a lot of fun, but I wanted to do something that was going to maybe make a mark on the world and really do something different. And I remember my first day in the animal shelter, I cleaned this whole area. All of these animals were ready for the time that we opened the doors. And I felt for the first time in a couple of years that I had accomplished something. So it felt really good. So my first day as an animal shelter, even though I was making $7 an hour at the time, this is 2005, it was one of the most impactful things that I felt. And I was making these connections with these animals, including a dog named Charlie, who was a dog that was a spitting image of the Cocker Spaniel that I grew up with. So, of course, I made a connection with him. Well, the second day I was told, and this is part of where no kill comes in too, that I would be working in an e room. And there's a lot of verbiage that's played with in our field that kind of protects people from not knowing what we're talking about, red lists and e-rooms. Well, I thought that meant evaluation to kind of help them find a home. But what E stood for, obviously, was euthanasia. As a guy that was a music promoter, then by day two was using, controlled substances to sedate animals and euthanize them. And it was, I'm not kidding, Sandy. It was probably anywhere from 20 or 30 cats and kittens a day to about 10 to 15 dogs a day. And that was my life for a year and a half. And at the time, the culture is very like, are you tough enough to kind of withstand this? I didn't want to let my people down. I found ways to, well, at least they're with me or I could comfort them. But the damage that that did to me was immense. However, the drive to say and to find things and find community, that's where I found no kill. I was looking for answers that I wasn't getting in that world. And what I decided to do with that experience is not allow it to destroy me, but allow it to motivate me to connect with the good in people, and to change that for future generations because it's a horrible act. And most of us naively don't know. And I had no idea, like you and I, we're talking about, 2005, but just had no idea. So that's really what spurred me into being where I am today. And I took jobs where I could. I've worked in Philadelphia, I've worked in Reno, Nevada, just to gain the experience in animal welfare to ultimately bring me to Best Friends. And Best Friends is great because I get to work with so many different organizations around the country to have impact for those animals, but again, for those shelter workers to change the plight because these are people that are so dedicated. However, many of them are very much caught in draconian operations that they need somebody to help them navigate and get out of. And that's what we're hoping to do.
So, what does it mean to you today to do work that is purpose driven? How do you feel about being in a field where you're literally helping to save lives?
It means everything to me because one, I work with people who are like me and they challenge me to be a better person. Those are the best kind of friends that you can have. And I surround myself with a community of volunteers and friends who are doing things. These animals are domesticated, they depend everything on us. So, our kindness is they live or die by, quite frankly. And this is what I've always wanted for life. It's not material success. Of course, I want to live comfortably. I want to be able to pay my bills without being stressed out. And luckily, I have a job that can do that. But really, it's to do something bigger and more. It's prepared me in everything in my life. Animals have taught me everything that has provided me guidance into the field and where I am today. And I will give back to them until the day I die.
And finally, assuming that the goal is reached or that you get as close as humanly possible in 2025, and you're to a point where no adoptable animals or almost no adoptable animals are being euthanized in the country, what will that mean to you?
It'll mean everything to me, but it also mean that the work's not over because every year we have to continue to make sure that that maintains and sustains. But it'll be a lifelong goal, and I already see it. I envision it. I visualize it every day. We're almost there, and it's going to be an exciting time. And I see this happen in community after community already. So I get to experience microcosms of it. So it's the best feeling in the world to set out and actually be a small part of such a big progression of changing 150 years of a horrible practice in our animal shelters.
Well, Marc Peralta, Chief Program Officer for Best Friends Animal Society, thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of animals, and thank you so much for being on the show today.
Sandy, I do have to say, I've been a fan for a long time, and it is such a pleasure. After maybe, I don't know, 15 years of watching you and listening to you to be back on here and getting to talk about animals with you. Thank you, frankly, for your always bringing the inspiration and the awareness to animals as well. You're such a champion for animals, and it's honestly my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and I mean it.
If you found today's show helpful, please share the information with someone who needs it and follow Still Time for Joy for more practical tips on weathering life's storms, as well as inspiring stories of people who have turned their pain into purpose. Please consider supporting the work that goes into producing the show on Patreon. Follow Sandra Levine Productions on Facebook and YouTube, and learn more at sandralevine.com.